The moment I saw Karren Pemberton standing at my fence line with her phone out, filming my horses grazing peacefully in their pasture, I knew my life was about to get complicated. I had moved to Cedar Springs, Montana, 3 years ago with dreams of escaping the corporate rat race in Seattle. My 10-acre property sat just outside the Willowbrook Heights subdivision, and for the most part, the arrangement worked perfectly. I kept to myself, maintained my horses, and ran a small freelance consulting business from home. The residents of Willowbrook Heights enjoyed the scenic views my property provided, and many of them used the riding trail that cut through the back corner of my land, a trail that had existed long before their cookie-cutter houses sprouted up like mushrooms after rain. But Karren Pemberton had recently been elected president of the Willowbrook Heights HOA, and she had made it abundantly clear during our few interactions that she did not appreciate having a working horse property so close to her precious neighborhood. "Can I help you?" I called out, walking across my driveway toward where she stood on the public road, still recording. She lowered her phone slightly, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "I am documenting the deplorable conditions your animals are living in, Oliver. Someone needs to advocate for these poor creatures." I looked back at my 3 horses. Samson, my bay gelding, was dozing in the afternoon sun. Daisy, the paint mare, was rolling happily in the dirt, and Thunder, my youngest, a gray Andalusian, was munching hay from a freshly filled net. Their water troughs were clean and full. The pasture was well maintained, the fencing was in excellent condition, and the shelter I had built offered protection from the elements. These horses lived better than most pets. "Karren, my horses are perfectly healthy and well cared for. If you have concerns, you are welcome to speak with my veterinarian, Dr. Harrison. He is out here quarterly for checkups, plus whenever anyone needs anything." She sniffed dismissively. "I have already contacted animal control. They will be the judge of that. Furthermore, the HOA board has discussed the fact that your operation here is negatively impacting our property values. The smell alone is unacceptable." "The smell?" I tried to keep my voice level. "You live a quarter-mile away, and I clean my pastures twice weekly. Nevertheless, we have rights. Our residents pay significant HOA fees to maintain a certain standard of living, and having a barnyard next door is not part of that vision." I took a deep breath. "Karren, I own my property outright. I am not part of your HOA, and I have every right to keep horses on agriculturally zoned land. If you do not like it, perhaps you should have researched the area before purchasing your home." Her face flushed red. "We will see what animal control has to say about that, and the county. I am sure there are zoning violations aplenty out here." She stomped back to her white BMW and drove off, leaving me standing there with a knot forming in my stomach. I had heard stories about HOA disputes, but I had always thought that staying outside their jurisdiction would protect me. Apparently, I had underestimated Karren Pemberton's determination to make everyone within eyeshot conform to her standards. 2 days later, I was working in my home office when I noticed an unfamiliar truck pulling up my driveway. The Cedar County Animal Control logo was emblazoned on the side. A middle-aged man in a tan uniform climbed out, clipboard in hand. "Morning," he called out. "I am Officer Rick Martinez. I received a complaint about horses on this property being neglected. Are you the owner?" "I am. Oliver Jennings." I shook his hand, trying not to let my irritation show. "The complaint is completely unfounded. My horses are well cared for." "I am sure they are, but I still need to do an inspection. Just procedure, you understand." I led Officer Martinez around the property. He checked the horses individually, examined their hooves, looked at their body conditions, tested the water quality, inspected the feed storage, and reviewed my veterinary records. The whole process took about 45 minutes. Finally, he straightened up and made some notes on his clipboard. "Mr. Jennings, I am going to be straight with you. These are some of the healthiest, best-maintained horses I have seen on my route. Whoever called this in either has no idea what animal neglect actually looks like or had ulterior motives." The HOA president from Willowbrook Heights made the complaint. She has made it clear she does not want horses near her neighborhood. Officer Martinez shook his head. "That is what I figured. We get these kinds of calls sometimes. People move out to rural areas for the views and fresh air, then complain about the farming and ranching that creates those views. For what it is worth, you are doing everything right. I will file a report stating no violations were found. If she calls again with the same complaint, we will consider it harassment." After he left, I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt the situation escalating in my mind. Karren was not the type to give up easily. Sure enough, later that afternoon, I received a certified letter from the Cedar County Planning Department. Karren had filed a formal complaint alleging that I was running an illegal commercial horse boarding operation on residentially zoned land. The irony was not lost on me. My property was zoned agricultural, not residential. I sat down at my computer and pulled up the county records, printing out the official zoning designation. Then I drafted a formal response, attached the documentation, and sent it off to the planning department. I also copied my attorney, Miles Chen, on everything. Miles and I had been friends since college, and while he practiced in Seattle, he had connections throughout the Northwest and had helped me with the property purchase. "This woman sounds delightful," Miles said sarcastically when I called to fill him in. "Look, you are on solid legal ground with the zoning, but these HOA types can be persistent. Document everything. Every interaction, every complaint, every phone call. If this escalates, you will want a paper trail. It feels like harassment already. It probably is, but you need to establish a pattern before you can pursue legal action. Just stay calm, follow the rules, and let her dig her own hole." The planning department responded within a week, confirming my property was properly zoned and dismissing Karren's complaint. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. The following Saturday morning, I discovered someone had filed a complaint with the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, claiming my horse manure management was contaminating groundwater. This triggered an inspection by a DEQ officer, who spent 3 hours examining my manure composting system, testing soil samples, and reviewing my waste management practices. "Everything checks out," the inspector told me, a hint of sympathy in his voice. "Your composting system actually exceeds the recommended guidelines. Whoever filed this complaint clearly just wants to cause you trouble. Let me guess. Karren Pemberton from the Willowbrook Heights HOA," he glanced at his paperwork. "I cannot confirm the complainant, but I can say that we have received multiple complaints from the same source about various properties in this area. After a while, we start to recognize patterns of vexatious reporting. Each inspection, each complaint, each certified letter took time away from my work and added stress to my life. But I remained determined not to let Karren's campaign push me off my own property. My horses were happy and healthy, my land was well maintained, and I had every legal right to be there. Then Karren made her biggest mistake yet. It was a Tuesday morning in late September. I was leading Thunder back from a morning ride when I noticed fresh survey stakes along the back portion of my property, near where the riding trail entered my land. The trail was a historic easement, established decades before either my property or Willowbrook Heights existed. It wound through the pine forest, offering beautiful views of the Madison Range. Residents from the HOA used it regularly for hiking, mountain biking, and horseback riding. Curious about the stakes, I followed them and discovered they formed a line, suggesting a completely different property boundary than what my deed showed. According to these stakes, about 2 acres of my land, including the section where the trail entered, supposedly belonged to the Willowbrook Heights common area. I immediately called my surveyor, Tom Richards, who had done the original boundary survey when I purchased the property. He came out that afternoon with his crew and spent 2 days conducting a thorough resurvey of the entire property line. "Someone is trying to pull a fast one," Tom told me as he packed up his equipment. "Your original boundary markers are still in place, buried but exactly where they should be. These new stakes are about 75 feet into your property. Do you have any idea who placed them? I can make an educated guess." I was right. A little research revealed that Karren had hired a surveying company, but not a local one. She had brought in a firm from Billings, and apparently provided them with incorrect information about the property boundaries. Whether the surveying company was incompetent or complicit, I could not say, but their stakes were demonstrably wrong. I sent a formal cease and desist letter to both Karren and the surveying company, along with copies of Tom's certified survey showing the correct boundaries. I also sent copies to the title company and the county recorder's office. This was not just harassment anymore. This was an attempt to literally steal my land. Karren's response came through her attorney, a slick-looking guy named Preston Walsh, who sent me a letter claiming that the Willowbrook Heights HOA had obtained an adverse possession claim to the disputed land, based on continuous use of the trail for recreational purposes. I had to laugh at that one. Adverse possession in Montana required exclusive, continuous, open, and hostile possession for 5 years. The trail easement was permissive, not hostile. The HOA had no claim whatsoever, and any first-year law student could have told them that. Miles was less amused. "They are fishing," he said during our phone call. "They know they do not have a legal leg to stand on, but they are hoping you will not want to deal with the hassle and might settle by giving them some land. It is a bullying tactic." Well, I am not giving them an inch. Good. I will draft a response making it clear that any further attempts to claim your property will result in a lawsuit for slander of title and legal fees. That should back them off. It did, temporarily. Preston Walsh sent a terse reply stating that the HOA was withdrawing its boundary claim without prejudice and removing the survey stakes. But I could feel the tension building. Karren had thrown everything she could at me through official channels and failed. I knew she was not done yet. The breaking point came on a crisp October morning. I was in town grabbing supplies when my phone rang. It was my neighbor to the east, Jim Kowalski, a retired rancher who had been helpful and friendly since I moved in. "Oliver, you need to get back here. There are HOA people on your property, and they are doing something to your fence." I made it home in record time to find a work crew, wearing Willowbrook Heights HOA safety vests, cutting a section of my fence along the trail easement. Karren stood nearby, supervising the operation. Her arms were crossed, and she wore a satisfied expression that made my blood boil. I parked and walked straight toward them. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Karren turned to me with false sweetness. "We are simply maintaining our trail access, Oliver. This fence is blocking the easement, and we have every right to remove obstacles. That fence is on my property, well away from the easement corridor. You are trespassing and vandalizing my property." The HOA's attorney disagrees. We have documentation showing the easement extends 30 feet from the trail center line, which includes this fence section. I pulled out my phone and called the Cedar County Sheriff's Office. I need to report trespassing and property destruction in progress. Karren's smile faltered slightly. You are being ridiculous. This is a civil matter. Criminal trespassing and vandalism are not civil matters, and you just admitted to ordering it in front of witnesses. The work crew, clearly uncomfortable, had stopped cutting and were looking to Karren for direction. She waved them forward. Keep going. He is bluffing. 20 minutes later, Deputy Sarah Thompson arrived. I showed her my property deed. The easement documentation showing the trail corridor was only 10 feet from centerline, and photographs I had taken of the crew cutting my fence. Madam, I need you to stop your crew immediately, Deputy Thompson said to Karren. This appears to be outside the legal easement area. This is HOA business, Karren snapped. We have rights. You have the right to remain silent, Deputy Thompson replied, her tone hardening. Because anything you say can and will be used against you. I am trying to help you avoid criminal charges here. Preston Walsh, the HOA attorney, apparently had better sense than his client. He arrived about 15 minutes later, clearly frustrated. After a quick consultation with Deputy Thompson and a review of the easement documents, he pulled Karren aside for what appeared to be a heated conversation. The work crew packed up and left. Deputy Thompson issued Karren a citation for criminal trespass and criminal mischief. She also filed a report documenting the incident, which I requested a copy of for my records. After everyone left, I stood looking at my partially cut fence, feeling something shift inside me. I had been patient. I had followed the rules. I had tolerated Karren's harassment, her false complaints, and her attempts to steal my land. But this was different. This was a direct attack on my property, and I was done playing defense. The trail easement that crossed my property was indeed historic, but the key word was easement. It granted the public a right-of-way, but I still owned the land beneath it. And crucially, I had the right to revoke or restrict access under certain circumstances, particularly if the easement was being abused or if public safety was at risk. I spent that evening researching Montana easement law, consulting with Miles, and reviewing the exact language of the original easement document. What I found was interesting. The easement had been granted by a previous property owner in 1967, long before Willowbrook Heights existed. It was designated as a permissive recreational easement, which meant it was not a permanent right-of-way but rather permission granted at the landowner's discretion. Can I legally close it? I asked Miles during our video call. Based on the language here, yes. It is a permissive easement, not a prescriptive one. You would need to provide notice and possibly show cause, but given the documented harassment and the recent property damage, you have more than enough justification. How much notice? The easement document requires 30 days written notice to any parties who regularly use it. In this case, that would be the HOA and the county, since it is listed on some county trail maps. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Can you draft the notice? With pleasure. The next morning, I had the fence crew come out to repair the damage and install a lockable gate at the trail entrance on my property. Then, I posted signs indicating the trail would be closed to all traffic effective in 30 days, per the terms of the permissive easement. The reaction from Willowbrook Heights was swift and furious. My email inbox filled with angry messages from HOA residents demanding I keep the trail open. My phone rang constantly with similar complaints. And of course, Karren showed up at my property that very afternoon, purple-faced with rage. "You cannot close that trail," she shrieked from the road. That is public property. Actually, it is my property with a permissive easement which I am revoking due to abuse and safety concerns. You will receive formal notice, as will the county. This is because of the fence misunderstanding. You are being petty and vindictive. This is because you have spent months harassing me, filing false complaints, attempting to steal my land, and then literally trespassing and destroying my property. The trail closure is a direct result of your actions. Maybe you should have thought about the consequences before you escalated things. The HOA will sue you. Let them try. I have detailed documentation of every complaint you have filed, every false claim you have made, and every law you have broken. Do you really want all of that presented in court? She had no response to that. She just stood there, trembling with fury, before finally storming back to her car. The formal closure notice went out via certified mail 3 days later. It listed the specific reasons for closure, including documented harassment, false complaints to multiple government agencies, attempted land theft, and criminal trespassing with property damage. I sent copies to the Cedar County Commission, the Sheriff's Office, and several local media outlets, since the trail was mentioned in some tourism materials. The story was picked up by the Cedar Springs Gazette, and then by Montana Public Radio. Suddenly, what had been a private dispute became public knowledge. The reporter, Jennifer Walsh, actually no relation to Preston, did her homework. She interviewed me, reviewed the documentation I provided, and then reached out to Karren and the HOA board for comment. Karren's interview did not go well for her. She came across as entitled and unreasonable, particularly when she admitted on record that she had filed multiple complaints against my property, despite never finding any actual violations. The optics of an HOA president harassing a horse owner and then having her crew vandalize his fence were not good. Several Willowbrook Heights residents, upset about losing trail access, started attending HOA board meetings and demanding answers. Apparently, not everyone had been aware of Karren's campaign against me. When the full scope of her actions came to light, including the legal fees the HOA had racked up paying Preston Walsh to pursue meritless claims, a significant faction of the community turned against her. I learned all this from Frank Morrison, one of the Willowbrook Heights residents who reached out to me with an apology. Frank was in his 60s, a retired engineer who had moved to Montana for the outdoor lifestyle. He was also an experienced horseman who had been using my trail regularly for years. "Oliver, I want you to know that not everyone in the HOA supports what Karren has done," he told me over coffee at a local cafe. "Many of us had no idea she was harassing you like this. When we elected her president, we thought she would focus on maintaining common areas and organizing community events, not waging war against our neighbors." I appreciate you saying that, Frank, but the damage is done. I cannot have people from Willowbrook Heights on my property after what happened. I understand. For what it is worth, there is a recall petition circulating. A lot of residents want Karren removed from the board entirely. That is an internal HOA matter. It does not change my position on the trail, Frank nodded sadly. I figured as much. I just wanted you to know that she does not speak for all of us. The 30-day notice period passed. On November 1st, I closed and locked the gate, officially ending trail access across my property. The county updated its trail maps accordingly. Hikers and bikers who had enjoyed the scenic loop now had to find alternative routes, which were significantly longer and less picturesque. I expected more legal action, but none came. Preston Walsh had apparently advised the HOA that they had no case and would likely face counter-suits if they continued to pursue the matter. The legal fees already incurred had been substantial enough to require a special assessment on all HOA members, which only increased the anger directed at Karren. For a few weeks, things were quiet. I went back to my normal routine of working, caring for my horses, and enjoying my property in peace. The harassment had stopped. No more inspectors showing up. No more certified letters with bogus complaints. It was almost eerie after months of constant conflict. Then, on a gray November afternoon, I noticed smoke rising from the direction of the closed trail. I grabbed my phone and my ATV and drove back to investigate. What I found made my stomach drop. Someone had started a fire along the trail, right at the boundary of my property. It was not large yet, but with the dry autumn conditions, it had the potential to spread quickly into both my land and the surrounding forest. I called 911 immediately while using the fire extinguisher from my ATV to start suppressing the flames. The Cedar Springs Volunteer Fire Department arrived within 20 minutes, and they had the fire under control within an hour. The fire chief, Marcus Webb, examined the burn site carefully. "This was deliberately set," he told me, pointing to the remains of what looked like a pile of old newspapers and kindling. "Someone built a campfire here, which is illegal this time of year, and then it looks like they just left it burning. Do you have any security cameras back here?" "No, not this far from the house. But I recently closed this trail access due to an ongoing dispute with the Willowbrook Heights HOA." Chief Webb's expression darkened. "You think someone from the HOA did this?" "I do not know, but the timing is suspicious." He took photographs and collected evidence, then filed a report with both the sheriff's office and the Montana Department of Natural Resources. Arson was a serious crime, especially when it involved wildfire risk. The penalties could include significant prison time. Deputy Thompson came out to take my statement. "We will investigate this thoroughly," she assured me, "but without cameras or witnesses, it will be hard to prove who started the fire." 2 days later, I got a call from Chief Webb. "Oliver, we found something interesting in the ashes." A partially burned HOA newsletter. The mailing label is still partially legible. It was addressed to a Karren Pemberton. "That could just mean someone picked up litter from the neighborhood," I said, though my gut told me otherwise. "Maybe." "But we also found tire tracks near the trail entrance from before you locked the gate. We made casts. They match a BMW X5, which is apparently the vehicle Karren Pemberton drives." "Is that enough for charges?" "Not yet, but the investigation is ongoing." The break came from an unexpected source. A teenage boy named Tyler, who lived in Willowbrook Heights, came forward with his mother. Tyler had been grounded and had his phone confiscated, but when he finally got it back, he had a video that changed everything. Tyler had been out riding his dirt bike near the trail entrance on the afternoon of the fire. He had filmed some of his riding, and in the background of one clip, clear as day, was Karren Pemberton parking her BMW by the locked gate, walking into the woods with what looked like a bag of something, and returning about 20 minutes later without the bag. The timestamp on the video was approximately 2 hours before I discovered the fire. Deputy Thompson brought Karren in for questioning. I was not privy to the details, but I heard through the grapevine that she initially denied everything, then claimed she was just walking the trail, then finally admitted to lighting a small fire to stay warm while she assessed the closed trail area. Starting a fire during a fire prevention period, on someone else's property, and then leaving it unattended constituted arson under Montana law. The fact that it was apparently done in retaliation for the trail closure added an element of criminal mischief and potentially reckless endangerment. Karren was arrested and charged with arson, criminal trespass, reckless endangerment, and criminal mischief. The bail was set at $50,000. The HOA's insurance declined to cover her legal defense since she had been acting outside her official capacity. Preston Walsh, wisely, declined to represent her. The criminal case moved forward through the winter. Karren hired a defense attorney from Bozeman, who tried to argue that the fire had been accidental, that she had only intended to light a small warming fire and had thought she extinguished it properly. The prosecution, however, had the video evidence, the witness testimony about her months-long harassment campaign, and the fact that she had been trespassing on posted closed property. In February, faced with overwhelming evidence, Karren accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to reckless arson and criminal trespass. The other charges were dropped in exchange for her cooperation. She was sentenced to 2 years in the Montana Women's Prison, with all but 6 months suspended, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the fire suppression costs, the damage to my property, and the costs of the investigation. Additionally, as a condition of her probation, she was required to resign from the HOA board and prohibited from holding any HOA leadership position in the future. The Willowbrook Heights HOA held an emergency election. Frank Morrison was elected the new president. One of his first acts was to send me a formal apology on behalf of the entire HOA, along with an offer to pay for the fence repairs that Karren's crew had damaged months earlier. I accepted the apology and the payment, but I kept the trail closed. Too much had happened, and I needed to protect my property and my peace of mind. However, I did make one concession. Frank approached me in March with a proposal. The HOA would like to organize a monthly volunteer day where residents could help with trail maintenance on public lands adjacent to the area. In exchange, they asked if I would consider allowing supervised, organized group rides across my property 4 times a year, with proper insurance and a signed waiver system. It was not a full reopening, but it was a compromise. The rides would be scheduled in advance, limited to small groups, and supervised by an HOA-appointed trail steward. Any problems and the privilege would be immediately revoked. I thought about it for a week. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep my property completely closed as a permanent reminder of what had happened. But I also recognized that most of the Willowbrook Heights residents had nothing to do with Karren's actions. They had been victims of her vindictiveness too, losing their trail access and getting hit with special assessments to cover her legal bills. I agreed to a trial period. The first organized ride was scheduled for April 15th, a beautiful spring morning. 20 residents signed up, all of whom signed detailed liability waivers and agreed to strict rules about staying on the trail and respecting property boundaries. Frank led the group, and I rode along on Thunder to observe. It was strange, seeing people on my trail again after months of it being closed and quiet. But it was also nice, in a way. The trail was meant to be used and enjoyed. That had never been the problem. The problem had been Karren's entitlement and harassment. After the ride, several participants thanked me personally for allowing the access. One woman, an artist named Patricia, even gave me a watercolor painting she had done of the mountain view from the trail's high point. "I have been painting this landscape for 3 years," she told me. When the trail closed, I was heartbroken. Not because I blamed you, but because I knew I would miss this view. Thank you for giving us another chance. That painting now hangs in my living room. Karren served her 6 months and was released on probation in August. I heard she moved away shortly after, relocating to Arizona to live with her sister. The Willowbrook Heights community seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The organized rides continued through the summer and fall. Frank proved to be an excellent trail steward, and there were no incidents or problems. In October, he approached me about making the arrangement permanent, with a formal easement agreement that clearly spelled out the terms, responsibilities, and my right to close access if the agreement was violated. Miles reviewed the proposed agreement and suggested several modifications to protect my interests. The final version included provisions for trail maintenance by the HOA, liability insurance naming me as an additional insured, quarterly inspections, and immediate termination rights if any terms were violated. I signed it on November 1st, exactly 1 year after I had initially closed the trail. The Cedar Springs Gazette did a follow-up story, noting the resolution and highlighting how a community had come together to move past conflict and find compromise. The reporter interviewed both Frank and me. "This whole situation taught our community a valuable lesson," Frank said in the article. HOAs are meant to serve their residents, not to give power-hungry individuals a platform to bully their neighbors. We have completely restructured our governance to include more oversight and accountability. It should never have gotten this far. For my part, I emphasized the importance of respecting property rights and understanding that rural living comes with rural neighbors. If you move next to a working farm or ranch, you do not get to complain about the natural aspects of agricultural life, I told the reporter. And if you try to harass your neighbors into leaving, do not be surprised when there are consequences. The story resonated beyond Cedar Springs. It was picked up by several national news outlets as an example of HOA overreach and the importance of rural property rights. I did a few phone interviews, always emphasizing the same points: respect, boundaries, and the rule of law. My life settled back into a peaceful routine. My consulting business continued to thrive. My horses remained happy and healthy. The organized trail rides brought a small but welcome bit of social connection with the Willowbrook Heights community, particularly with other horse enthusiasts like Frank. Jim Kowalski, my rancher neighbor, stopped by one afternoon in December with a bottle of whiskey and a grin. "I have been ranching in Montana for 40 years, he said as we sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the Madison Range in shades of pink and gold. And I have seen my share of disputes with newcomers who do not understand rural life, but I have never seen anyone handle it quite like you did. You stood your ground without losing your cool, and you made sure there were consequences for the harassment. Good on you." We toasted to good neighbors and bad HOA presidents getting what they deserved. As winter set in, I found myself reflecting on the entire ordeal. It had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. Karren's harassment had stolen months of my peace and cost me thousands in legal fees. But it had also taught me important lessons about standing up for myself, documenting everything, and not backing down when I was in the right. The trail closure had been my line in the sand. It was the moment I stopped reacting to Karren's attacks and started setting my own terms. And while it had felt harsh at the time, it had ultimately been the right decision. It had forced the Willowbrook Heights community to reckon with what their HOA president had been doing in their name, and it had created the space for real change to happen. On Christmas Eve, I received a card from Frank and several other Willowbrook Heights residents, thanking me for the trail access and wishing me happy holidays. Inside was a gift certificate to the local feed store and a photograph of the community during one of the autumn trail rides, with the golden aspens blazing in the background. I put the photograph on my refrigerator, next to Patricia's watercolor painting. The new year brought new beginnings. The Willowbrook Heights HOA, under Frank's leadership, focused on legitimate community improvements, maintaining common areas, organizing social events, and creating a better relationship with surrounding property owners. They even invited me to their spring barbecue, which I attended and actually enjoyed. It was strange, becoming friendly with people who had once been on the other side of such an intense conflict. But most of them had never been my enemies. They had simply been living their lives, unaware of what Karren was doing until it was too late. In March, I got a letter from Karren. It was postmarked from Phoenix, Arizona, where she had apparently settled permanently. The letter was short and to the point. "Mr. Jennings, I am writing to apologize for my actions. My attorney has advised me that this letter could be used against me legally, but my therapist has advised me that making amends is part of my recovery. I was wrong to harass you. I was wrong to file false complaints. I was wrong to attempt to claim your land, and I was especially wrong to trespass and start that fire. I let my desire for control and my frustration with not getting my way turn me into someone I am ashamed of. I have lost my position, my reputation, my freedom, and my home because of my choices. I do not expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I caused and I am sorry." I read the letter several times, trying to detect any hint of insincerity or manipulation. But it seemed genuine. People could change, even people like Karren, especially when they faced real consequences for their actions. I wrote back, a single paragraph acknowledging her apology and wishing her well in her efforts to move forward. I did not say I forgave her, because I was not sure I did. But I also did not need to carry anger toward her anymore. She had faced justice, and that was enough. Spring turned to summer, and the organized trail rides continued without issue. I even started joining them occasionally, enjoying the chance to ride with other people and share the beauty of the landscape I had fought so hard to protect. One afternoon in July, I was riding with a group that included several newcomers to Willowbrook Heights. A young couple, recent transplants from California, rode beside me. "We heard about the trouble with the previous HOA president," the woman said. "It sounds like it was pretty intense." "It was," I replied, "but it worked out in the end. Are you ever worried it could happen again?" With a different HOA president? I thought about that for a moment, watching Thunder's ears flick back and forth as he navigated the trail. "I am not worried," I finally said. "Because now there is a documented history of what happens when someone tries to harass me off my property or abuse trail access. And because the community learned from what happened. Sometimes conflicts like that, as painful as they are, end up making everyone more aware and more careful." The young man nodded thoughtfully. "It is good to know the HOA takes property rights seriously now. That was actually a concern when we were deciding whether to buy in Willowbrook Heights. But when we researched what happened and how the community responded, it actually made us more confident in the purchase. It showed that the residents here care about doing the right thing. It was a perspective I had not considered before." The conflict with Karren, as terrible as it had been, had ultimately strengthened the community by forcing them to confront problems in their governance and make meaningful changes. As we rode on, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My property was secure. My horses were thriving. My relationship with my neighbors, most of them anyway, was good. And I had proven to myself that I could stand up to bullying and harassment without compromising my principles or my rights. The trail wound upward through the pines, opening onto the vista point where the whole Madison Range spread out before us. The group paused there, as riders always did, taking in the view that had inspired Patricia's watercolor. The mountains stood eternal and unconcerned with the small human dramas that played out in their shadows. "This is why we moved here," the young woman said quietly. "For moments like this." I smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. It was why I had moved here too, and why I had been willing to fight so hard to protect it. As we rode back down the trail toward home, I thought about how much had changed in the 2 years since Karren had first shown up at my fence line with her phone out, ready to make my life miserable. She had tried to drive me away, to use government agencies and legal threats and intimidation to force me off my land. Instead, she had lost everything while I remained exactly where I wanted to be. There was a lesson in that, one I hoped other HOA boards across the country might learn. Power comes with responsibility, and when you abuse that power to harass people who have done nothing wrong, there are consequences. Sometimes those consequences are legal, sometimes they are financial, and sometimes, like in Karren's case, they are all of the above. The sun was setting as we returned to the trailhead. The group dispersed, everyone heading back to their respective homes, calling out thanks and making plans for the next ride. Frank stayed behind to help me lock the gate. "You know," he said as we worked, "I think this arrangement is actually better than when the trail was just open all the time. The organized rides give people something to look forward to, and the structure keeps everyone accountable." "It works for me," I agreed. "And it protects my property while still allowing access. Win-win." "Karren could have had this from the beginning," Frank said, shaking his head. "If she had just talked to you like a reasonable person, asked about concerns, worked together to find solutions. Instead, she chose warfare." "Some people only know how to fight," I replied. "They see everything as a battle to be won rather than a problem to be solved." We finished with the gate and stood for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Thanks for giving us another chance," Frank said. "I know it would have been easier to just keep the trail closed permanently." "Probably," I admitted. "But easier is not always better. This way we all benefit." As I drove my ATV back to the barn, I reflected on how true that was. The easy path would have been to give in to Karren's demands early on, or to sell my property and move somewhere else to avoid the conflict. The easy path would have been to keep the trail closed forever after I finally got the upper hand. But easy paths often lead to resentment and regret. The path I had chosen was harder, but it had led to justice, accountability, and ultimately, a better outcome for everyone involved. I put Thunder and the others to bed for the night, making sure they had fresh water and hay. Samson nickered softly as I scratched his favorite spot behind his ears. These horses had been the innocent bystanders in Karren's campaign, and I was glad I had been able to protect them and give them the life they deserved. Walking back to my house, I stopped and looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and sage. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. This was my home, my land, my place in the world, and no HOA president, no matter how determined, was going to take that away from me.